Good evening, everyone. I'm going to go through the topics we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to do a brief Aspen system overview. Then we'll go over some cool features that you may or may not know about if you're a current Aspen customer. We'll also go over a few tips. The cool features and tips are things I've gleaned from the last several shows I've been to, so common questions that we get while we're at shows. Of course, towards the end, we'll talk about some current promotions we have going on. And then we'll also have a Q&A session. So basically, we have Mr. Mike Studley. He's answering the Q&A sessions for me this evening. So you can start typing your questions now if you have something. At the end, we'll follow up with any questions we didn't get to, or we'll go over some commonly asked questions. Before I get started here, I'd like to go over the opening picture here. This picture represents a big philosophy about Aspen Avionics. And I'm not talking about this super cool 2500 Max flush mounted on this hydro dip panel, not at all. I'm talking about the center stack here. The center stack, the top here, is an NGT 9000 ADSB transponder. Probably one of the most feature-rich transponders out there because it's not only is an ADSB transponder, but it's also multifunction display. But we really don't care about that. This could be a Avionics SkyTrax ADSB product. It could be a GTX 345. It could be an older transponder that's paired to a GDL88 or a free flight box, providing ADSB information. Whatever you have here for an ADSB transponder, Aspen's going to work with. Below that is this really nice PSE engineering. I think it's the PMA 450. Works really well with the Aspen. I really like the intelligent audio this thing has as well. But then again, this aircraft had a Garmin audio panel in it before. We really don't care. Whatever you have for audio panel is going to work perfectly well with your Aspen system. Below that, a pair of GTN 650s. This aircraft started its life with a pair of GNS 430s. Went to 430 WASs. I was going to go with IFD 440s, but I got such a sweet deal on these 650s by somebody who wanted my 430s that I couldn't say no. But once again, the point is, we don't care. 430s, 530s, 430Ws, 530Ws, GTN 650, GTN 750, IFD 440, IFD 540, IFD 550, KSNs, even some of the older analog GPS units out there are going to work perfectly well with this Aspen display. And right below that, out of sight, barely out of sight, is the DFC 90 autopilot. Super awesome autopilot by Avionics. This aircraft started off with a 55X. Once again, S-Tech 30 all the way to the new 3100. Going to work perfectly well with your Aspen systems. If you have an older King, Century, Cessna autopilot, all work perfectly well with the Aspen systems, to include the new GFC 600. So the point I want to make before we get started is, no matter what's already in your panel or what you want to put in your panel in the future, Aspen as a display manufacturer works really hard to make sure all this stuff works very well with the Aspen displays. Okay, so let's get into the meat of this. First thing we want to talk about is the Evolution Pro Max PFD. The big thing on here is these are newly updated components. The Aspen displays have been around for probably 13 years prior to the first hardware upgrade. This hardware upgrade includes a new screen, which is better anti-glare capability, a new graphics card. The original graphics card had like 16 color combinations. The new graphics card has over 16 million color combinations, which makes things like synthetic vision and the nav map pop just so much nicer. This also has a new processor that's 4 times as fast as the original processor. So everything runs really smooth now. I also have new ARs and ADC sensors that are thinner and run much cooler. The goal here is more processing power for future features and options. And we're already working on the next 2 software releases already in progress. So we're never sitting still. We're always working on something new. And this new hardware is going to make that possible. And I've already talked about the visual feature enhancements. Like I said, synthetic vision, the nav map, all the displays are so much brighter now. The Max systems are plug and play with a legacy system. So if you're a current customer with a legacy system and you want to upgrade to a Pro Max, the new displays plug into the same harness from your legacy displays. The only difference is the Maxes have audio, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a future slide. but it's really one wire from the existing connector to the audio panel, and that provides the Max audio. So really, really plug and play, very minimal labor to transfer or to upgrade from a legacy to a Pro Max. The Pro Maxes are both compatible with the STEC 3100 and GFC 600 autopilots now. The 600 just got approved earlier this year, and the 3100 was a year or so ago. So if you want to go with the new digital autopilots, those are approved. There's new backup battery technology with increased capacity, which we'll talk about in a bit. And of course, the biggest feature is dual-aided ARs, and there's no backup attitude indicator required anymore. And I'll talk about why that's possible here in a bit as well. From there, we have our multi-display systems. I also have a 1500 system. But the big thing here on the 2000 and the 2500 Max is with our new dual-aided ARs, the MFD 1000 is completely go back up to the PFD 1000, which means you can totally remove all the backup, your old analog 6-pack gauges from the Aspen panel. I've got a picture of this further down the line, which I can show you as well. And that's all because of the dual-aided ARs and a new battery. Next up is the Evolution E5. It is the 5-year anniversary of the release of the E5, by the way, and we'll talk a little bit more about that here in the future. Big things on the E5, backup attitude like the Pro Max is not required. The E5 is fully IFR certified as long as it's paired with a panel-mounted IFR GPS. 430, 430 WAS, 530, 530 WAS, all those would apply for this. Same with the 650s, 750s, 440s, 540s. So all the modern GPSs will work with this. It's also compatible with legacy avionics. So if you've got older radios you want to keep, older autopilots, King and Century autopilots, if you purchase the optional ACU and E100, E5 will drive those autopilots as well. If you're looking at the newer autopilots like the Trio and the Bendix King Aero Cruise, the latest software release of 212 does provide selected altitude and indicated airspeed for those autopilots as well. Really cool thing about the E5 is if you start off with the E5 at the lower price point, you decide later you want all the cool features of the Pro Max, you pay the price difference between the two, and we make it a Pro Max. We don't gouge you and try and sell you a Pro Max all over again. You just literally pay the price difference. And so what are those features? What are the big differences? Well, the E5 cannot have synthetic vision. The E5 cannot have ADS-B traffic or weather. E5 cannot have angle of attack. The E5 is a standalone display, meaning it can't be paired with an MFD. E5 doesn't have bearing pointers. So there's a couple of features like that. So, but if you want those features, you just upgrade that to a Max. This particular one is shown with the optional advanced unlock feature on the E5 that provides true airspeed, outside air temperature, winds, as well as your GPS WAS enunciations. I think that's about an extra $500 unlock if you want that feature. If you're buying the E5 and you know you're going to upgrade to the Pro Max later, then just hold off on that because that'll be a standard feature on the Pro Max. Okay, on to some cool features. I think a lot of people don't realize this is built in the Aspen systems, and this has been a part of the Aspen system since the legacy days. So it's not something new; it's been around for a long time. And that's the emergency RSM GPS. This system automatically activates in the event of loss of your GPS system, your panel-mounted GPS. And what the Aspen does is it retains all the active waypoints before you lost that GPS system and maintains those on your display. So here you see you have the amber enunciation GPS 1, GPS 2, and all three displays. You see that, that's your signal that you've lost GPS input. Then you'll get the RSM GPS reversion, emergency use only on all three displays as well. You'll see here I've got a flight plan. Before I shut the GPS system off, the lake between Double and Eagle and AWASH would have been magenta. And now it's white. So all your waypoints are still there, flying up to Santa Fe. Notice here that your deviation indicator on the HSI is removed. That's because it's not going to be the same standard. The emergency GPS is not the same standard as a WASH GPS, so we remove that deviation indicator. However, you can still use the base map on all three displays to safely navigate along your route of flight and hopefully find VFR, break out your other radio, talk to ATC, tell them what's going on. get you safely back on the ground. You cannot alter the flight plan. So whatever was active when that GPS is gone, that's what's staying in there. And you certainly can't shoot an approach in this mode because you have no deviation indication. So the goal is to buy you time along your pre-planned route of flight in IMC conditions and give you time to coordinate with ATC to get to BMC conditions. So this is a really, really great safety tool. Next cool feature that's been around for a long time is synthetic vision in the flight path marker. This provides 3 new PFD views. You've got a full screen synthetic vision view. That's SV1. SV2 which is my personal favorite, is the synthetic vision on top and the blacked out HSI on the bottom. And SV3 is really nice, especially if you're a single display customer, because you have synthetic vision on the top of your attitude indicator, then you'll have a terrain map on the bottom indicator on your HSI. So really, really nice. Synthetic vision is a great IFR, marginal VFR type tool for obstacle terrain avoidance. If you're a day VFR pilot, synthetic vision may not be a great tool. However, it does also show traffic on synthetic vision, which really helps pick stuff out. But the big goal in synthetic vision, IFR, marginal VFR, or night VFR for obstacle terrain avoidance. The flight path marker are these little guys right here. And typically, if you're flying along and you don't have any obstacles or terrain in the way, it's going to be a green flight path marker. So remember, when you're flying, you're always being affected by wind, at least most of the time. So your nose is crabbed off one direction or another. The flight path marker is where the aircraft is actually going. So that's really helpful in avoiding terrain and obstacles. Notice here, when you're within 45 seconds of terrain or obstacle, the flight path marker is going to turn amber. You're going to get this caution obstacle message here. Then when you're within 45 seconds of a terrain, or I'm sorry, when you're in 30 seconds of terrain or an obstacle, you're going to get the warning message. It's going to be warning terrain, or warning obstacle. So you're going to get that visually, and you're also going to get an audible message here, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Big thing is, remember also when you're in a crosswind, when you're on an approach, and you've got a crab in, that flight path marker is going to be, if you've got your needle lined up, that flight path marker is going to be right on the runway. So really, really handy for building that situational awareness and just giving you extra comfort level that everything's working all right. Another thing about synthetic vision that we also have is a narrow view and a wide view. I'm typically flying in the wide view. Out in the Western US, I'm typically in turbulence. The narrow view when you're in turbulence, it's probably better off using the widescreen view. However, when we used to fly into San Diego a lot, going through that marine layer is pretty smooth. The narrow view really helps pick up terrain a lot better, as well as pick up the runway better. So I recommend trying them with on your next flight. If you haven't ever done it before, try the different views. Next cool feature is a ground check marker. This has been an Aspen feature since the beginning. The ground check marker is this little cyan diamond right there below the heading bug. This represents your actual track over the ground. So it's a really great tool to help compensate for wind drift. Think of it when you're on the approach or even a cruise, you're going to pull the diamond to correct back on track. I wish I should have put a video in here for you. I'll probably do that in the next one. But if you're pulling, as you're turning, you're correcting back to course, you're actually pulling the diamond to get back on ground track. So practice incorporating the ground check marker on your next flight, especially if you're on an IPC or something like that, you put a CFI, and really see how that helps with your wind correction. And if you have an MFD, there's also a cyan dash line that projects from the aircraft. That is also your ground track. You kind of use those together to help maintain your course. Another cool feature that's been around for a long time is angle attack. We introduced this several years ago with the legacy displays. Back in 2018, the FAA did a study on 2017 accident data and revealed there was one loss of control fatality every 4 days in general aviation in 2017. So they made several recommendations. One of them was to introduce or reintroduce angle attack to general aviation pilots. This was kind of confusing for me as a military pilot. We taught angle attack all the time in flight school. And you can really see when student pilots start using angle attack, their approaches and landings are much better, much smoother. So I was kind of curious why the pushback in the general aviation community. I'm not quite sure where that was, but with the FAA's push in 2018, it's really coming back. So things you want to look at on our indication, we have two indications. The lower one is the flaps down, up one is flaps up. And ideally, you want to fly when you're coming in on an approach. This line right here represents 30% above stall. So when you're in when you're in landing configuration, you park this lower needle right there. You know you've got a 30% stall margin. Our angle of attack indicator was developed in concert with the Italian Space Agency. We use our own inputs, the inputs inherited in the Aspen system without an external probe to give you a really, really nice AOA indication. And you don't really have to stare at AOA. It's really just part of your scan. Our backcountry pilots like this as well, because right here, this margin, this is about 10% above stall, and they go into really short fields, so that's where they use that. But really, the majority of us normal pilots, general aviation pilots, coming in, we want to use that 30% above stall. There are some really good videos on our website made by Phil Boyer several years ago, and he shows you what each indication looks like on a power on stall, power off stall, and the approach stern stall. And that's really the number one killers that approach that are based to final stall. So if people roll to 30 degrees angle of bank, most pilots know that their stall speed, straight and level to about 30 degrees angle of bank, is roughly the same, maybe a few knots higher. But once they roll to 45, they don't realize how quickly that stall speed goes up. And this is why angle of attack is so important. So when you're doing that base to final, take a quick look at your scan, take a quick look at your angle of attack indicator, and make sure you still have plenty of stall margin. Okay, the next cool feature I want to talk about, and this was introduced to the Max displays, and that's dual-aided ARs, or what we call degraded mode. If you're a legacy customer, you recall that indicated airspeed is a big part of the AR solution for the Aspen displays. So if you're having a bad day, you've iced over your pitot static tube, or your pitot tube, and you didn't pre-flight your pitot heat, and you can't clear it, you get this red X. This is why all Aspen systems had to have a backup attitude indicator. The legacy systems did. What we do now is called dual-aided ARs. So in the event of a pitot static blockage that you can't clear, we now use GPS ground speed to maintain that AR solution. So it's no longer a single point of failure. And as long as you're doing normal IFR maneuvers, standard rate turns, normal climbs and descents, you will not see a difference in performance in the Aspen attitude indication. However, we do recommend in this situation, you do half standard rate turns and shallower climbs and descents, and make sure you tell ATC that you're in this degraded mode. They need to give you shallower turns, maybe 15 degrees angle of bank, and shallower rates of descents. This helps them set you up for an approach. So make sure you pass that information along. When you see this message, attitude degraded, that's your cue to turn your pitot heat on. If you turn your pitot on and your pitot heat's working, it's going to clear it. It's going to go right back to normal mode. We actually test these at 45, 60 degrees angle of bank. And we do these in flight. We roll to 60. We'll do a 360. We'll come back to wings level. When we do that, we see like maybe a 2 to 3 degree turn in that direction for about 5 seconds before it levels off. So still relatively safe. But the idea is your IMC do normal or do less than normal, half standard rate, shallow climbs and descents, and that's going to safely get you back on the ground. And this feature is available in both the Pro Max system and the E5s. Next cool feature is the audio callouts. This is only available on the Pro Max system. And this is like flying with a really, really good co-pilot. So if you bug an altitude, in this case, I've got 7,000 feet bugged here, whether I'm climbing to it or descending to it, depending on my rate of climb or descent, I'm going to hear the word altitude about 200 feet prior. That's my clue to look at the altimeter, make see where I'm at. Then once I'm at 7,000 feet, I'm going to hear the word altitude again. Now, as I'm cruising along at 7,000 feet, if I deviate more than 200 feet above or below, I'll hear the word altitude over the headset again. That's my clue. Look over here and make sure I correct that before I get a violation. If I'm on an instrument approach and I bug my minimums, as I'm coming down, roughly about 100 foot prior, I'll hear approaching minimums. Then at minimums, I'll hear minimums. So once again, Aspen's being a really good co-pilot and has your back on making sure you're hitting your numbers. It also provides alerts for caution and warnings for the synthetic vision like we talked about earlier. So as those flight path markers are turning amber and red, you can hear caution, terrain, caution, obstacle, or warning, terrain, or warning, terrain, warning, obstacle. So you're going to get those call-offs as well. Also, if you have a multifunction display and you've got a timer set, you're going to hear the word timer in your headset. That's your cue to go to the MFD, go to the timers page and see which timer expired. It's a really, really nice feature here. One of my favorite features is the altitude intercept arc. I use this all the time. This is introduced with the Pro Max system. So what this does is indicates where along your route of flight you're going to reach your bugged altitude. There's your altitude intercept marker right here. So it's perfect for verifying if you can reach an ATC assigned altitude. So say you're told to climb and be at 9,000 feet by a certain fix. So you bug 9,000 feet, you start your climb or descent, and you look at the fix. As long as that arc is before that fix, you know you're going to make it. If the arc is beyond the fix, you know you've got to increase your rate of climb or descent. Or if you're already at max rate of climb or descent, you got to tell ATC, hey, I'm not going to make that crossing restriction before you get there. So make sure you don't get violated or worse yet, hit something. So this is really, really powerful tool. One of my favorite ways to use it is I was doing quite a lot of flying up to Centennial. And if the weather's good, I'm always flying VFR with VFR flight following. And without, I can't think of any time they allowed me to, but the approach control guys always tell you to remain clear of the Class B if you're going to Centennial VFR. So what do? I look at my GPS and see how far Centennial is away from the shelf. I create a long track waypoint there. I look at the bottom of the shelf is 9,000 feet. So I bug 8,007 feet up here and start my descent. And look right here, my altitude intercept arc is right there, right before the shelf. And so I know as long as I maintain this descent path, I'm going to clear that shelf. So that's one of the greatest ways I use the altitude intercept arc. Another good way to use it is if you're going to an unfamiliar pattern, set 1,000 feet or 500 feet above pattern altitude. So you arrive at the airport, 5 miles out at whatever higher altitude you want. If you know you're going to overfly the field, 1,000 feet overfly into the pattern. If you're going to enter on that side, 500 feet, that gives you still enough time to look around the pattern, see who's out there, and then the pattern nicely. So really, really great tool. Several ways to use this. Like I said, this is one of the way I use it the most. It'll also show up on the PFD. This PFD just ranged down to 5 nautical miles, but if it was ranged out to 40, you would see the altitude intercept arc. So it's going to show up on all three displays. On to some tips. We get a lot of questions about the battery and the battery system, how it works. Well, the Aspen system is constantly monitoring the aircraft electrical system. So if it notes an anomaly, it goes above a certain parameter, or goes above or below a certain parameter, it's going to automatically switch the battery for you. The battery should be checked prior. It says here IFR flight. The battery technically should be checked prior to every flight to make sure it's at least 80% charged. But at a minimum, I get it. Sometimes we're in a hurry. At a minimum, make sure before you go IFR, you check to make sure that battery's 80% charged. And how you do that is you press the menu button here. You scroll over using the right knob. You scroll over to page 14 to 15. When you get there, external power is going to be green. Well, you press this button right here, and that changes to green. And so that's going to give you a little countdown timer. It typically takes about 10 to 15 seconds. It's going to tell you how much battery you have remaining. At that point, once you've checked the battery, you just go back to external power, press the menu button, and get back on the menu. As long as it's above 80% charge, that battery is guaranteed to last 30 minutes in extreme hot or cold temperatures. And I'm talking temperatures too hot or too cold for you to fly. And we put these things in environmental chambers, and we really stress test them. And these are, like I said, you would not want to be in the environmental chamber while we're doing these tests. So typically, what that translates to is in normal cockpit temperatures, short sleeve shirt or light jacket, that battery is going to give you about 45 to 75 minutes of useful life, depending on the age and the percent it was charged up at before it moved there. So in your next flight, if you got to see if you've got a flight check or doing an IPC, and challenge it. Go in there, switch the battery power in the flight, and see how much time you have left in the preventive electrical system failure. Much better to get a good feel for this in a controlled environment than having to rely on it for the first time in an actual environment. So go, it's very easy to do. Like I said, we always recommend you do stuff with a CFI or a good instructor. Next tip is the 360 versus ARC HSI and ARC CDI. The Aspen PFDs have 3 different compass modes. The default is a 360 HSI, and it seems when it pops up, no one ever changes from there. They seem to, that's something they were learned. You learned on the original 6-pack displays. The 360 seems to be the most popular. The ARC mode is also very handy though. It shows 100 degrees of arc across here, so it blows up that compass rose quite a bit. So it makes heading control much easier. You also got ARC HSI or CDI mode. If I'm at altitude, ARC, and I don't have to worry about terrain, I'll probably be using the ARC HSI. But as I'm getting lower, especially if I'm flying out here in the west in terrain or obstacles, the ARC CDI mode is really handy because it unclutters the center of my display. And so if there's terrain or obstacles out there, I can see them a lot easier. So on your next flight with a CFI, try these different views and see which one you prefer. With these 3 compass views, the 3 synthetic vision views, the wide and narrow, there are actually 21 different PFD combinations you can try. And I venture to guess most of our customers just stick with 360 HSI, but really get out there and expand and try and look at these different views and see which one works for you. I really like this view if I'm hand flying an ILS, because once again, the heading control is much easier to do. Plus, once I have my wind correction figured out, I center up my heading bug, and I'm making my corrections within that heading bug. It makes hand flying an ILS or LPV much smoother. It really prevents you from over controlling. So next flight, give that a shot. Next tip, bearing pointers are still useful. I talk to so many customers. We joke about children of a gentle line. We're always GPS direct. Who cares about the bearing pointers? But these things are really useful. They really help your situational awareness during vectors. For instance, here on this approach, Mr. Mike Steldy got this picture for me last week. He's in IFR training now. So here you are, and just imagine now, I just had the MFD up here for reference, but just imagine you just have a single display and you're being vectored. ATC controllers are human too. They can forget about you, they make mistakes. So using the bearing point is a very powerful tool to make sure you know where you're at all times. So for instance here, I've got GPS 1, I've got FACNO on the needle here. So here's FACNO, here's the initial approach fix. And that number 1 needle is pointing to FACNO. So that makes perfect sense. That's where I'm at. The number 2 needle he has back here on the VOR, and that's part of the Mr. Approach waypoint. So that needle back here, the number 2 is pointing back to this VOR right here. So those 2 needles, while I'm being vectored around on a single display, really helps build my situational awareness. And if I see I'm flying towards something, and this happened to me when I was in the military flying in San Diego a lot, the controllers get busy and they forget about you. And this is before synthetic vision, but we had forward-looking infrared, and I could see that I was headed towards an obstacle off in the distance, and beyond that were some hills, and we just kept going straight ahead and trying to get alerted edgewise. And finally, we got through to ATC. He got us a turn and actually apologized because we forgot about us. So remember, you've got to build your SA to keep you safe. Another good thing is, remember, GPS outages occur. So there are times you have to fly an ILS and you're using the cross radial for your positioning. So I challenge you, next time you're doing your IPC, instead of loading the ILS in the GPS system, just tune in the ILS and do that manually using the VOR needles as cross-reference to see if you can still do it. It's pretty challenging. It's a pretty challenging way to do an approach. I mean, that's how we used to do it all the time. But now with GPS, that makes things a lot easier. But remember, GPS isn't always going to be there, so it's good to practice those old approaches without GPS. This seems to be the biggest question that I spend the most time on the shows, and it's how do you shoot an ILS approach with a procedure turn or standard T using GPS steering. So, there's a lot of verbiage here, and I'm kind of going to read through this and fill some more information. So the first thing you got to do, no matter what GPS unit you have, is activate the approach in your GPS and set the CDI course to GPS. And so say I'm right here, and so I've got that, I'm over here, I'm clear direct Dudley. So I'm going to turn towards Dudley, set the heading bug in the general direction of Dudley. Then I'm going to engage the heading and altitude modes in my autopilot. And let me back up. This is assuming you have like a KFC 200, an older autopilot that doesn't have GPS that's built in. If you have a 55X with GPS steering, DFC 90, 3100, GFC 600, that's a little different. So this is for you folks with the older autopilots. So I've got these modes, and then I'm going to press the GPSS hotkey on the Aspen. And at that point, the system is going to fly me to Dudley. It's going to execute the procedure turn and line myself back and line the aircraft back up on final. Once you're on final, you activate the approach mode on the autopilot and change the CDI source in your navigator. Don't forget to do this. Change the CDI source in your navigator to VLOC, because you've got to fly this approach in VLOC mode. That's going to change. Once you change the CDI source in the navigator to VLOC, that's going to automatically change the HSI input on the Aspen from GPS to VLOC as well. At that point, it's going to intercept glide slope and fly you down to decision altitude. Really, really nice hands off. Once you get down there, say you don't have the runway in sight, you do your normal misapproach procedure as far as cleaning up the aircraft, get the aircraft climbing. In this case, you're going to climb straight at 6,500 feet. You're going to start your right turn, 7,000 up to 7,700 feet. And then you execute the misapproach on the GPS. You change your CDI source on the navigator back to GPS and re-engage the autopilot in heading mode. And it's going to take you right back to Dudley and on their hole. So I know this is a lot of verbiage here, but really it's a pretty simple process. Once you've done it a few times, I really encourage you next time you're out with your instructor, give this a go, and you'll find this is really easy to do. If you've got a new autopilot, I'll tell you my DFC 90. I love that thing. Well, it used to be. I recently sold that airplane. The DFC 90 out here, I would put it in nav mode. It would fly to Dudley, do the procedure turn. It would the autopilot would automatically switch to approach mode, and you have the ILS source, the auto switch as well on your navigator. It automatically switches ILS. So I really don't have to touch the controls from out here all the way down to decision altitude. It's doing everything by yourself. And I imagine the 3100 and the GFC 600 probably do something similar. Unfortunately, I have not had the opportunity to fly either of those autopilots. But once again, it seems like a complicated procedure, but try it with your instructor and you'll find you'll get the hang of it pretty quickly. Okay, so most of you probably know that we released 212 earlier this year. The big thing on the 212 was the GFC 600 interface for the Pro Max, not for the E5, but for the Pro Max, it's now certified. And we also added a new cool feature called the extended runway center lines on the MFD. This is really sweet. So here you are, you're told to either enter left downwind for 1.7, pretty easy to see that. You're told to enter left base for 2.2. So these really help you orient yourself on the correct way to enter the pattern. Really, really nice feature. I think you go from $3 to $5 to $10 per mile. So 3 miles is probably plenty big, but you can try the different systems and try the different lengths. We've also reduced the auto brightness down from 70 to 50. The legacy systems were always, the auto brightness was 70. We initially introduced the Max. We didn't change that, but we found the Maxes were so much brighter and better clarity that we really didn't need to be 70, so we autoed that to 50. Also, we've expanded the fault log with a more robust ARs data collection. So think of your modern car, you're driving along, you get the check engine light, you go to your dealership, they plug a computer in, they tell you all the codes and tell you what you need to fix the airport or fix your car. That's sort of what we do now. In fact, so if you're flying along and you see an anomaly with your attitude indicator that corrects itself, well, you want to know what's going on with that. You go back to the shop, they put a data card, a little SD card in the slot right here, and it downloads the data from that flight. It retains several flights. So you don't have to do it the very next flight, but they'll do it for the next several flights. They'll look at the data, they'll send that to the field service guys. and they'll be able to interpolate what's going on and tell you what the best corrective action is. So it makes troubleshooting a heck of a lot easier. Also, if you have an older autopilot EA100, there's some software updates pertinent for the EA100. And it did also correct the DFC90. When 211 was released, there was an anomaly where you're getting a ARs miscompare. So 212 corrected that, and the DFC9 is working perfectly again with that. It also, as I mentioned, adds corrected air-in outputs for selected altitude and airspeed for the Trio and Medics Cruise autopilots. If you have an older E5, that E5 may need to come back to the factory if you're using an Aero Cruise or Trio autopilot. And I know the Trio guys are close to their certification. They've been working really hard with the FAA, so hopefully soon that the interface will be all approved on their end. Okay, on the current promos. Before I do that, I mentioned earlier I wanted to talk about this is a Bruno Fly with Bruno, his 2000 Max system. And note this is installed with no backups here because they're no longer required. If you haven't followed Fly with Bruno, he does some pretty funny stuff. Like he has a flight. This recent one, he makes his girlfriend wear goggles while he's eating dinner. It's pretty funny. So I don't want to steal his thunder, but if you get a chance to see that one, check it out. But the gist here is we're having a big promo right now. There's buy one, get one at half price. So if you're a legacy customer and you have a single legacy display and you want to go up to a 2000 system, you pay full price for the Max upgrade for the PFD, and we sell you the MFD 1000 half price. If you don't have any Aspens in there right now, you pay full price for the PFD Pro Max, and we give you the MFD 1000 half price. So really good promo going on for a while. And as I mentioned earlier, this is the 5-year anniversary of the E5. So we rolled back our pricing for the E5 back to 2018 pricing. That's going on for a short time as well. So if you're interested in an E5 system, that's a really good, it's a really good opportunity to purchase one. So who do you purchase these from? Well, we go direct to a dealer, but if you have questions and you're in the Western US and Western Canada, that's Mr. Dave Wilcox. These are all the states he covers. If you're in the Northeast, Midwest, or Eastern Canada, that's Mr. Mike Studley, who's helping me today on the Q&A and the chat room, the Q&A session. If you're in Florida, Southeast Florida, and all the way to Texas, that's Andy Smith. And then if you're anywhere else in the world, that's Mr. Corey Arella, who's our international sales rep. Remember, we sell direct. We don't sell direct customers. You do have to go through a dealer. If you have questions before you go to the dealer, these are the folks you want to contact. So with that, I'll hand it over to Mike here to see what type of questions we have, and we can answer some more. I think we still have about 20 minutes or so to answer questions. But I'll leave this slide up for now. That way you can continue to write down their contact information. Thank you.
Yeah, so Mike, we had like 4 questions that came in. If we do have some time left, if somebody wants to submit a question through the Q&A box, please feel free to do so at this point in time. And we're happy to answer your questions for you.
I'll highlight one of those questions, Perry. There was a question about the GFC 500, which is a very common question that we get in support. We would love to work with Garmin on that interface. And what we need is for customers to reach out to Garmin and let them know that there's a demand in the field for it. They sometimes forget about the customers and what they want. And they're so used to telling them what they should buy. It's good for them to hear from customers to let them know that what they're looking for. If somebody's got an instrument panel full of Aspen glass, there's no reason at all why they shouldn't want to work with us on it. They never told us no, but they haven't told us yes yet. So what we need is for you folks to get in their ear and let them know that that's what we're looking for.
Yeah, and to follow up on that, Mike's point, the new FAA rules require the autopilot manufacturer to do all the flight testing. So we cannot flight test for an approval for any autopilots in that case. So And we work fairly interesting. We work with both S-Tech and Garmin on the S-Tech 3100 and the GFC 600. Each autopilot manufacturer has some different requirements, so we provide our full access to the Aspen systems and what their outputs are. They come back and say, "Hey, can you make these changes?" So then we go back and make those changes. In the case of the S-Tech 3100, we did that with 211. We made several changes over the course of a couple of years to that software, working back and forth. We test it to make sure our software continues to work across all our features. Then they test it to make sure that software works with their autopilot. It's the same thing with Garmin and the GFC 600. We work back while we were working with S-Tech. We were also working with Garmin, doing a lot of changes to our software to make sure their 600 will work with our system. But ultimately, the autopilot manufacturer has to do that flight test. I mean, it kills me because I have yet to fly either one of those autopilots. So if you have questions on those autopilots, unfortunately, you have to go to Genesis or Garmin on those.
Okay, are there any other questions? Oh, I see one here and I can answer it. Will the slides be available for review? And I will, Mike already answered that. The webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing later. I will also have this posted on the Evolution video library, which is a link right on our homepage. And so as soon as that recording is available, that will be posted on the webpage. But also, please feel free to email me directly if you want that a little bit sooner. My name is Perry Coyne, and that's Perry Peas and Papa ERRI.COYNE at Aspen Avionics. So please feel free to email me if you're looking for a recorded version of the webinar. I'm happy to send it to you.
James, one of the questions we had here, I think we could answer if you get back to one of the slides that shows the PFD. Just a basic question on how to switch nav inputs. And that will be affected by which radios you've got connected to the Aspen. Typically, what we do is we use this bottom center button that maybe, James, you could highlight it for me. Bottom center button there. That'll switch between radio number 1 and radio number 2. It won't switch let's say if you've got a pair of navigators, and it will not switch between GPS and VOR mode. You still do that on the radio. But if you have radios that are like the older analog type, you'd switch between radio number 1 and radio number 2 with that center button.
Yeah, and that's an excellent question. Remember, when you're using the panel mounted GPS for an approacher to navigate on, that unit has its own CDI source button, whether it's Avionics or Garmin, and that's where you change that source. And so when you change that source from GPS to VLOC or back and forth, it's going to automatically change this from GPS 1 to VLOC 1 for you. So you don't have to change it there and change it on the Aspen, because we're going to follow. If we're on radio 1, like this one is right now, when you change that source from VLOC to GPS, it's going to switch. The only reason, as Mike mentioned, you use this button is if you've got 2 navigators and I want to go to GPS 2. So I press this and this would be GPS 2. And then once again, on the number 2 GPS, when you're going back between VLOC 2, GPS 2, it's going to automatically switch this for you here. And these buttons on the side here, these are your bearing pointers. Let's see if I can go back a couple slides here. Where's that bearing pointer? Here you go. So the buttons below here are kind of off picture here. This switches for whatever source is active on your GPS system. So whether it's GPS 1 or 2, GPS 1 or VLOC 2, whatever the case may be, you just cycle through that button and get the proper needle you want at that time.
Okay, I think that's about it as far as questions go. Oh, no, there's still a couple more coming in. I'm going to keep, let's see. So I'll, Okay, a question about XM weather, dropping a signal between flights, have to send a refresh request to reinstate the signal. That is most likely something either in the antenna or in the XM receiver. I'd have a Aspen dealer or an Aspen dealer or an Avionics shop take a look at that and see if they can get to the bottom of it.
This is something I forgot to mention. It actually came up today on a field support call. And if you're flying along and you're a VMC and you get attitude degraded, that is not a problem with that Aspen display. That is telling you something's going on with your pitot-static system. So a couple of different scenarios. Say you take off and degraded mode isn't there. You're flying along, you're climbing up to altitude, all of a sudden degraded mode comes on. You fly with it for a while, you start descending down, and by the time you land, you're back to normal mode. That's normal telltale sign you've got water in your pitot line somewhere. As you're climbing to altitude, it's freezing, so you lose pitot static, or you lose pitot. As you come back down, it thaws, and pitot starts working again. So if you see this in normal VFR conditions, that's really good indication to check have your shop check the pitot line. But either there's water in there might be a kink line, a hole in the line, a bad connector. But you should never, this is an indication of a problem with the pitot system, not an Aspen failure.
James, could you go over the switching between ARC mode and 360 mode? We had a customer that missed the beginning of the presentation.
Okay, well, that button is going to be right here. You see where it says 360. And so you're in 360 mode right now. And so you press this, it goes from 360 to ARC. And then to go from ARC CDI to ARC HSI, I unfortunately don't have a picture of that, but you go into the menu and you scroll a couple pages in, and there'll be the ARC mode, and you can select back and forth between CDI to HSI. I think if it seems like whenever you look at a picture of a cockpit of an airliner, they always have the ARC mode up. And I'm not sure, I'm not an airline pilot, but if they just prefer the ARC mode because it's easier to see the big picture and be more precise. But really, if you've never tried ARC mode, I really challenge you to do that. It's a really great way to fly an ILS.
So Mike and James, I'm seeing a couple other questions coming in right now. Don't know that anything else is open at this point in time, other than the fact Mike is typing an answer to Ed Livermore.
Yep.
So this will be the last call for questions, and then we're at about 10 minutes before the end of the webinar. So if you'd like to hang on and listen to the questions, that's fine. If you'd like to drop off at this point in time, that is certainly fine with us. And I'll be happy to, like, again, send me an email if you want a recording of the webinar. I'm happy to get that done for you. Okay. All right, James and Mike, thank you very much for hosting this webinar, and for those all still on the, excuse me, on the online here, I appreciate your attendance. And again, please feel free to reach out to us at any point in time, and with any questions you may have, we'll be happy to help. All right, with this, I'll conclude the webinar. I think Mike is still typing answer. I'm going to let him type, and we'll go from there. Again, thank you, everybody. Have a great day.